There's nothing more comforting than the sights, sounds, and smells of a café con leche. It's always a homecoming. The whole process like a painting coming to life. The can of Bustelo, full of energy, la cuchara, eager to scoop, taking as much as it can, straight to the dutiful cafetera. Abuela's hands, wrinkled, worn, beautiful, conduct and add the most important ingredient. The flame burns bright blue, begging the process forward. And we wait. We wait. We wait for that most satisfying sound, and we fill the space of waiting with the moment of feeling our deeply rooted Cuban souls. I was born here. I felt very American my whole life, but then at a certain point I realized I was so Cuban as well, despite never being there. So the more people come to this amazing country for opportunity, for political asylum, for many other reasons, the more their children and their children's children are gonna wanna know, well, yeah, I'm American, of course, but how about this other part of me? Where do I get my passion? Where do I get my temper? Where do I get, my drive? Where does it come from? So that's what this journey is about. It's my own curiosity to discover, to honor, and to navigate through complicated waters. So I started my journey and flew all around the country to interview Cuban-Americans of all kinds, artists, musicians, politicians, and of course, abuelitos.
Yo me crié en Ciudad de Ávila, pero nací en un campo de un padre campesino.
Yo nací el 27 de julio del 25, 27 de julio del 25, ¿ok? Yo cumplo 90 años.
Is this your first time to Miami?
Growing up, the only Cuban most people knew was Ricky Ricardo from I Love Lucy. Today, Cubans are everywhere. I'm about to interview the #1 anchor person in the Bay Area, Jessica Aguirre. A Cubanita, and little known secret, she's from Elizabeth, like me. Elizabeth, New Jersey in the house.
When I think of Cubans, I always think of us as laughing and being loud and being, raucous and music breaking out and us dancing and eating and that kind of sense of, there is a sense of chaos.
There's a joke that if you just roll down your window in Miami and yell, "Ito!" everybody's gonna turn around because everybody is Carlito, Juanito, Pepito.
It's kind of like a Cuban thing. You call people by a description of what they look like.
Me decían Miguelito, Quilito, agua fría con hielito.
El sabio de la familia. O el loco de la familia.
Sí, a mí me decían Cuca. ¿Y tú?
¿Por qué tú te ríes?
Porque Cuca era una mula que pateaba.
When it comes to Cuban food, and it happens to us all the time. Because everybody says, oh yeah, there's a great Cuban restaurant here, there's a great Cuban. And when you have grown up eating food cooked at home, there's nothing like it.
Yo creo que la comida cubana más sublime que hay es el arroz con pollo.
Oh, black beans and rice and lechón asado.
Frijoles negros, black beans.
Flan. I love flan.
Vaca frita, bistec empanizado.
Which is my favorite. My comfort food, I guess, would be bistec empanizado con arroz, frijoles colorado y platanito maduro frito. I mean, that's like...
Llevamos aquí 50 años y 9 meses ya de oíste en los Estados Unidos.
To immediately begin discussions with Cuba to reestablish diplomatic relations that have been severed since January of 1961.
On December 17th, after almost 54 years, the conversation began to change.
¡Leche para los niños! ¡Comida para el pueblo! ¡Leche para los niños! ¡Comida para el pueblo!
The hope for a new Cuba is palpable, but for many, it's still a very complicated issue.
I was a little surprised about the December 17 announcement because Cuba and the U.S. had been negotiating behind the scenes. I knew that Obama wanted to change Cuba policy, but I didn't expect it to be that quick and that radical.
But yeah, there's so much happening in Cuba that's so interesting. That's around art, that's around food, that's around music. There is a ton. There's no question the politics shapes sort of your access, your ability to leverage those things to visit, to even just be in the country.
What can we not do if we're talking to one another? Those conversations aren't going to be easy.
And so I think we're seeing change in Cuba in a way that we as a community hadn't expected. But ultimately, it's very hard to argue that change is not happening.
Of course, there's a lot of curiosity to go and see it, but we're not going to be trendsetters to go just because it's happening right now. There's still values that we need to make sure that we withhold.
I've talked to actually a couple people about it. There's two ways of looking at it. Yeah, there's the family part where, yeah, a lot of people did go through tough times, and it's a hard thing. That's how it is, you know. But I mean, I also learned actually in an economics class this year, you know, there's a lot of things going on in the country itself. And me personally, I think it's good that, you know, they're opening up, you know, people can be exposed to more of a, I guess, developed country and try to develop it as well. So there's two ways of looking at it. I'm still young, so I don't really have a big, you know, impact yet. And I'm still waiting here. I get the part that my family doesn't have that, but I also feel like people can go to help the people that are still there. So it depends how you look at it.
O sea, ¿qué cosa es ser apolítico? Yo lo único que pienso es en una definición de Aristóteles, el filósofo griego, que decía que el hombre es un son politikon. Eso viene siendo un animal político, es lo que quiere decir. Y que todo aquel ser que no fuera un animal político, entonces era o una bestia salvaje o un dios.
Can you take the politics out of it?
No. That's why we're here. My parents and my grandparents left because of politics. That's the only reason. If not, they'd be there. So you can't take the politics away.
Agreed.
The 2016 election. If a Republican is in power versus a Democrat is in power, how will that change what's happening now in Cuba?
Well, if the Democrats win in 2016, they will continue with the reforms or the policies that Obama has initiated. With the problem, if Congress is still Republican, they're going to have the opposition of Congress. If the Republicans win, I think they will put a stop to any of these changes and will try to have a hard bargain with Raul and his generals. And the bargain is going to be, we're willing to change if you provide meaningful, irreversible concessions. Cuba hasn't given the United States any concessions up to now. So the Republican majority will want significant concessions from Cuba. Not only economic concessions, but political concessions, human rights concessions.
¿Qué esperanzas tienen ustedes para un futuro positivo, quizás cambio?
Yo no creo que él vaya a cambio. No.
Pero ella dice quizás.
Quizás no, tenlo por seguro que no, porque fíjate, todo lo que se está diciendo y lo que se está hablando es que aquí el presidente le está dando todo lo que ellos piden, todo lo que piden, pero ellos no están dando nada.
Yo estoy seguro que Cuba va a ser libre. Yo tengo la completa seguridad que tú, Ricky y el niño van a ir a Cuba libre. Yo no voy a estar vivo, pero menos de 10 años se cae el gobierno ese de Fidel Castro.
No lo creo.
Sí, me obliga, sí.
Cubans are incredibly ingenious. There's been a maker society in Cuba since el periodo especial. Since everything was falling apart, they had to figure out how to resolver. So yeah, you know what? I don't blame them for wanting a microwave that they didn't have to build with wire, chewing gum, and a Band-Aid.
Really brings this moment of change to a more palpable moment. You know, like back in 2000, there was that feeling that things could change. So that December 17th, which I believe is San Lazaro's date, is bringing about this hope for change.
And it took away the excuse that the Cuban government had used for so many years as to why there wasn't food on the table, why there wasn't freedom in the streets, why there wasn't freedom of speech in the press. It was always the fault of the empire. It was always the fault of the North Americans, the embargo, the Yankees. Yankees get out. Cuba sí, Yankee no.
Pues ellos lo que quieren es que le entreguen la base Guantánamo, es lo que están tratando, que le entreguen la base Guantánamo. Eso.
La base de Guantánamo
¿Okay?
No la van a entregar.
Bueno, ya tú lo verás.
No, tenemos una cosa.
Mientras tengamos este presidente, tú verás.
So now things have changed, I think for the better, because I can actually talk out loud about wanting to go to Cuba and people aren't looking at me like I'm crazy. Well, some of them still do, but I'm just curious, you know? I still feel that strong, heavy family sentiment that we're never supposed to go back. But in my head, I feel like, of course, you know, you should go. And I know lots of people that have gone, and it's totally safe, and it'll be life-changing for me. But it's hard to do something you've been told not to do your entire life. Fulgencio Batista was president of Cuba from 1933 to 1944, and then again from 1952 to 1959, when he returned as a brutal and corrupt dictator, jailing and killing his opponents and using his military to terrorize the entire island.
Un coronel que estaba el jefe del ejército, le dio orden que en Holguín, que tenía 25 barrios, que tenía que amanecer en cada barrio de esos un muerto. Y el ejército salió a la calle y al primero que se encontraban en el barrio de por ahí lo cogían y lo mataban. ¿Qué sucedió? Que todo el mundo empezó a sentir que había que votar a Batista como fuera posible.
So when Fidel Castro emerged as a young lawyer turned revolutionary, his support was vast and spread throughout the country. Then on January 1st, 1959, Batista filled a large plane with his supporters and fled the country to the Dominican Republic, leaving Cuba to Fidel Castro.
Claro, Fidel fue el que vino y se puso contra Batista, pues vamos a apoyar a Fidel, vamos a apoyar a cualquiera. Entonces Fidel habló un discurso y dijo que había gente que estaba diciendo que él iba a hacer esto, que el otro. Dijo, no, la revolución que yo tengo es más verde que las palmas. Y va a haber elecciones, y va a haber de todo. Nunca las hubo.
We all went outside and we all were screaming and yelling, Viva la Revolución. And any Cuban out there that denies that, tell him to come and see me, because I call him a liar to his face. Everybody wanted a Fidel. Everybody.
My family, like many others, were hopeful that free elections were coming and that Fidel Castro meant positive change. But soon after he took power, that change took a different tone.
My father became very disenchanted. I don't remember the year. I think it was either, I believe it might have been January 1960, but it was about a year or 2 years into the government, the communist government, that Fidel Castro, basically he made the comment that there was no need to have elections, free elections, because the revolution was, you know, of the people and for the people. And that really had a very strong impact on my dad. And my dad, interestingly enough, had a very good friend who was Chinese, who had run away from communist China. and he told my dad, he says, Marco, actually calling Nene, I said, Nene, this is communism, I'm leaving. You know, I was here, I've seen this before and I'm leaving, because I had immigrated to Cuba from China, running away from communism. And my dad initially said, nah, this is just There's just some misunderstanding. This will all get cleared up. I mean, clearly it never did.
Después que entró Fidel en el año 50 y pico, fue terrible. Allí no había movimiento, no había nada. Te quiero decir que todo era censurado.
Y con entera confianza, soy marxista-leninista y seré marxista-leninista hasta el último día de mi vida.
Castro soon declared himself a Marxist-Leninist, seized properties, nationalized businesses, removed clergy, and jailed opponents. After Castro came in, how did you feel things change?
But for me personally, was when I went to the store to get my baseball cards, because I liked playing cards in the street with the boys, and there were no more. And the guy says, "Aquí ya no hay cosa del imperialismo." And that was like, what? No baseball cards? That was like, for a kid, paramount. That's when I felt the scarcity. And then the toilet paper. No toilet paper. You had to clean your ass with a grandma. The grandma, the newspaper, the only newspaper in the country. So you would have to get the paper, cut it up, and scramble it to soften it up, and that's how you would use it. And there was a joke, around the time in Cuba, because there was the illiteracy campaign. So the joke was, everybody's so literate que hasta el culo puede leer.
Teniendo yo apenas 10 años, no es que era voluntario, era obligado. Había que estar un fin de semana, trabajo voluntario, cortando caña o en la agricultura. Otro fin de semana era preparación combativa, pero escopeta sin arma, de palo. El otro fin de semana había que estar en el plantel, arreglándolo, y entonces era un fin de semana para mí. Me di cuenta que como un hombre me podía dirigir mi vida, de que lo que yo tenía que hacer todos los fines de semana. Tenía un fin de semana para hacer lo que yo quería.
Tell me about the day you left Cuba.
I think I have to backtrack to a few days before we left, because I came home from school and the door to my parents' house was sealed, that you couldn't enter anymore, which meant the appropriate authorities had come and interviewed my parents and taken inventory of everything that was in the house. And then they could only take what they could into bags that my mother made from the curtains. And it was sealed. So I couldn't go in and take anything. And so I stopped washing my hair, thinking, okay, this is not going to be inventory, but I'm going to take Cuban earth, because aguacate is full of red earth. So I didn't wash my hair before I left.
As I interviewed more and more people, I began learning more about myself. I realized that growing up in the United States was a great privilege, and that I had no idea what my peers went through in Cuba during the same time. My cousin Iglesias, whom I never met until this moment, is now a famous American opera singer, but growing up, life in Cuba was very difficult. Meeting her was both beautiful and revealing.
¿Cómo tú decidiste que te querías ir de Cuba?
Hacía tiempo ya. Esa era mi...
Tu juventud, esa era, y yo estoy aprendiendo ahora porque
claro.
No sé tanta la historia, pero yo sé que esa época de los 90 era una época que le decían la época especial, que es
muy dura.
Que no había nada.
Yo viví en una escuela desde los 14 años, becada, y pasamos por mucho. Lo que pasa es que cuando uno es joven, uno no se da cuenta. Uno mira hacia atrás y uno no se da cuenta de todo el trabajo que uno pasa. Pero al mismo tiempo éramos hasta cierto punto felices porque no teníamos ningún conocimiento de lo que era un futuro, ¿no? Venía alguien del extranjero y nos volvíamos locos por ir a un concierto, por ver a alguien, porque no teníamos ninguna información en el exterior. Y entonces cualquier cosa era inmensa para nosotros y muy grande. Y Me acuerdo que hacíamos colas en la escuela para poder repetir una bandeja de comida la comida era terrible, era horrible. Y cosas así simples nos hacían felices, ¿me entienden? Me acuerdo que cuando teníamos azúcar y dormíamos con un vaso de agua con azúcar, era para nosotros algo importante, ¿me entiendes?
La gente dormía de un día para otro para coger las entradas, con los catres, los canapés en el parque de frente. A las 3 de la mañana pasaban la lista. Yo salía de La Habana Libre y yo pasaba por el Acapulco y estaba la gente ahí con café y todo eso. Porque el que no estuviera a las 3 de la mañana perdía el turno. Cuando se armaba la cola llegaba hasta Zapata, que te estoy hablando como 15 cuadras, de larga la cola. Llegó un momento, una vez estábamos nosotros sentados arriba viendo al público abajo, antes de actuar, y empujaron la puerta aquella de cristal. Tú sabes que la entrada de los cines allá en Cuba son puertas así de cristal y todo eso. Y la empujaron y cogió aire y se reventó aquello. Y entró toda la molotera aquella. Yo decía, ay Dios mío, ¿qué es esto?
Cuando yo llegué aquí, número uno, no podía creer, no, para mí era algo tan surreal, lo de las luces, porque a mí me tocaron muchos apagones. Es decir, la época mía en Cuba era de horas y horas sin tú ver la luz. Y todo el mundo en la calle, con velitas o linternas, todas esas cosas. Entonces, ese choque, ¿no? De llegar aquí, ver todas esas luces, cuando llegué al aeropuerto, cuando estaba en el avión, ¿no? De ir a un supermercado, tantas carnes, era una cosa así como surreal.
I remember, I was very young, but I remember that it was very traumatic because there was no warning, just a knock on the door. And I remember a lady in militia uniform, in a green uniform, and we couldn't take anything because the house had already been inventoried. So if there was anything missing from the house after they inventoried it, you couldn't leave. So everything had to be there inside the house because it was property of the state. And I remember that I threw out sorry. I was throwing out my little soldiers and cowboys out the window so that my mom's best friend's little boy could have them. And maybe they didn't inventory those because they let us leave.
Tú jamás podrás saber lo que es el comunismo si no lo pasas por él.
Tell me about how it was decided that you were going to leave Cuba.
They kept it a secret from me. They kept it a secret from me because I didn't want to leave Cuba. I was just becoming to be adept. My mother homeschooled me for the wrong reason. She homeschooled me because we were a very affluent family, very socialite, very rich family. And she didn't want me to go with the poor kids to school. So they had me, Mary, and Hilda homeschool with a professor, which I used to hate. He used to beat the shit out of us all the time. And all the kids were going in uniform, want to become part of that Cuban school. But then again, to be fair to my mom, which I do love, we fight a lot, but I do love my mother very much. My mother was protecting me because the minute I went to school, they used to tell us at the beginning of the morning, let's pray for a snack after school, bizcocho, Coca-Cola. And then they used to, this is every day, they used to keep us after school. And I'm gonna cry because I can't have this. They used to keep us after school and say, there's no God, there's no Jesus, but there's Castro and the revolution, the militia will come and give us food.
Dios no existe.
And then they used to make us sing. I remember singing this, which I hated because in theory it's beautiful, but it could never work. I remember us making us sing Arriba los pobres. Arriba la esperanza. And if we didn't sing that, they used to beat us with stick. Beat us. The militia would come in and beat us with stick. I'm not rich. I'm well-to-do now. I'm helping the Cubans. I help the Mexicans when they come in. But it's my goddamn money that I could tell who to help with. Not the fucking state to take my money away and give it who they want to give it to. So it's very hard. And that's why we hate Castro. If I could see him, I'd spend the rest of my life in jail. I'd put a fucking bullet to his head.
In those days, it wasn't uncommon for even a quiet chemistry major to carry a gun. And Goyo was a crack shot, having practiced since boyhood on tin cans and chickens. Aye, he would gladly give up everything he owned. His oceanfront condo on Key Biscayne, his collapsing brownstone off 2nd Avenue, every last cent of his considerable fortune. Even the weekly rendezvous with the shapely bank teller Vilma Espin, who was a magician of hand-mouth coordination and kept him in fighting form since his wife of 59 years had died unexpectedly last New Year's Eve, for the privilege of killing his nemesis.
And freedom really, it's hard to describe, to put in words. It's something that you feel inside you, and it's knowing that if you want to say something, you're not going to go to jail for what you say, and be able to express yourself, to grow as a human being, to choose your future. All of that is freedom.
Cuando estábamos preparando todo para salir directamente, porque tú sabes que yo llamaba a México y llamaba y los cansaba.
¿Cuánto tiempo estuvieron en México?
Nos dijeron que teníamos que estar en México 6 meses. No, solamente estuvimos en México 13 días. Se consiguió un contacto que pagábamos $2 nada más, $2. Y así pasamos, en el grupo del avión volamos 45 y todos pasamos, con los 45 pasamos la frontera.
¿Cómo que pasaron la frontera? Explícame eso.
Pasamos porque pasamos el río Bravo, todo fue el río Bravo. Lo que pasamos, agua aquí, todo era terrible.
Si caía, quedaba.
More and more Cubans began leaving the island in order to escape communism, with visas or without, by boat, by raft, or sometimes by swimming across shark-infested waters to reach the American base in Guantánamo. ¿Cuánto tiempo estuviste preso?
Estuve preso desde los 16, 66, como 3 años algo. Pues nada, lo que pasó fue que me escapé y entonces mi sueño se hizo realidad porque vine por la nadé la bahía. Ya esto es la base de los americanos. Entonces, yo salí por aquí, vine por aquí, le di la vuelta y llegué aquí.
My family story is very much typical of every Cuban story when you really think about it. My parents came individually to the United States. My mom was only 15 years old when she came. It was right after Fidel Castro had taken power, and her mom had just died of a heart attack. And literally, I always try to put myself in my mom's shoes and think about what was I doing when I was 15 years old, and how would I have been able to leave my family? So she never saw her father again. She was separated from everything. I mean, when I think about it, I think my mom left Cuba a girl, And in months later in the United States, she had to become a grown woman.
So this is a suitcase. This is where, I travel here with my parents. And the suitcase contained literally 3 pairs of underwear and some minor toiletries. That's all we had. This was the entire possessions for my family. And this suitcase is actually made out of cardboard. And this is the tag. So we flew from Varadero to Miami, and then the following day from Miami to LA. And that was a National Airlines tag that we had. And now I keep it covered because I'm really fearful that it's just increasingly falling apart. This is already not working, and it's so fragile.
¿Cuál fue el punto donde ustedes decidieron irse de Cuba?
El punto fue que ya Fidel empezó entonces a quitarte los niños, te quitaban los hijos. Ese era el problema, mi amor. Entonces te quitaban los hijos para adoctrinarlos. Y ahí te lo adoctrinaba y se fue el desespero de la familia para sacar a sus hijos de Cuba. Yo dije, mi hijo sale conmigo. Si no salgo yo, mi hijo se queda conmigo, no sale para salir todo.
Between 1960 and 1962, more than 14,000 children were sent out of Cuba alone by desperate parents who feared they would be stripped of their parental rights and that their children would be sent off to work camps in the Soviet Union or in remote parts of Cuba. This became one of the world's largest political exoduses of children, called Operation Peter Pan. The children were received by Catholic churches, foster parents, and orphanages. It took years for many of them to reunite with their families, and some never saw them again.
Yo estaba un poco nervioso porque a pesar de todo, Cuba para mí es Cuba. Y pensé que más nunca la iba a volver a ver, que le estaba dando el adiós. Yo conocía bien a la gente que decían que iban a volver y sabía que para volver había que regar la vida. Y muchos sí podían estarían aquí, pero de los que yo conocía había poco.
¿Cómo que regar la vida? ¿Qué quiere decir eso?
Sí, que para tumbar a Castro había que tumbarlo con la fuerza. Y en la fuerza, pues, tú puedes morir.
For many, including my family, leaving everything behind in Cuba was very traumatic. But at the same time, it gave them strength and determination to create new lives in America. So they became Cuban-American.
Oh, New York was the great carnival for me. I feel very fortunate to have grown up in New York, especially in contrast with growing up in a very conservative Cuban household. So it was a big division, and I compartmentalized it because for me there was no way to reconcile it. It was either when I walked in the front door, I was in 1950s Cuba, even maybe 1940s Cuba, with a whole different set of rules and regulations and expectations for comportment, etc. I walked out the door. I was in New York of the 60s, the 70s, ultimate freedom, everything in contrast.
Born in New Jersey, moved to Los Angeles. Okay, so we lived in LA. And I remember as a little girl living in Los Angeles, we would always speak Spanish at home. I showed up the first day of preschool, not even preschool, kindergarten, only speaking Spanish. I was that kid that didn't speak a word of English until I went to school. And but then I remember when we were growing up, we lived in Glendale. And my mom always used to say to us before we left the house, okay, we're going to speak English now. Make sure you don't speak Spanish. But she would say it with her very heavy Spanish accent. Okay, we're going to talk in English now. We don't want people to know that we are Hispanic. And my sister and I were always like, well, if you talk, they will know.
I was born and raised in Miami.
And tell me, what was it like growing up in Miami?
I always, to me, I think you always feel like you have to explain Miami to people. And one of the things I always say was it was like growing up in Casablanca. There was just this sense of glamour and danger, and people are always looking for their exit papers.
this is home. I love it. It's a tropical paradise. It's the best of both worlds. You know, it's the American dream, but in your language, and with your buddies and your friends and your music and your food.
Miami, es que Miami tiene tantos colores.
You know, I always tell people something interesting about me. I was conceived in Spain, and it's true. Born in Puerto Rico, and it's true. Raised in Miami, and it's true, but I'm Cuban. It's the weirdest thing because my identity is 100% Cuban.
I went to Hialeah Junior, Hialeah High. I worked at Hialeah Hospital. I'm as Hialeah as you can get. Well, when we first arrived in Hialeah, Hialeah was still an American city. There were still Americans. And through the freedom flights, 250,000 of us left the island. And a lot settled in Hialeah. So within a, spectrum of 7 or 8 years, you had 100,000 Cubans settling in Hialeah, and it was because there were so many factories. Yuyarani Factoria, I mean, that's what Hialeah was known for. So Hialeah has factories almost all the way around, and you had all these Cubans that needed to work, and my parents were not the exception. 5 days after we arrived from Cuba, they were in a factory in Hialeah, both of them.
Este país es para las personas que tienen mucho talento, que trabajan muy duro. Tienes que trabajar muy duro. Si tú no trabajas duro, no vives aquí. Porque tú tienes que merecerte vivir en este país.
Si yo pensaba, y quiero ser en esto claro, si yo pensaba que en América yo podía realizar mis sueños de que la familia mía tuviera una oportunidad de estudiar, de tener sus casas, de vivir honradamente, pues aquí yo iba a cumplir mis ideales.
Mi primer trabajo fue en una fábrica de juguetes que le decían la Deluxe. Ahí era armar los juguetes, era una fábrica muy grande de juguetes que los distribuían en todos los Estados Unidos. Y después de ahí, cuando ya me fui de allí, entonces me fui a trabajar en una fábrica de costura, de portugués era la fábrica. Y después entonces, ya cuando llegaron mamá y papi, me fui a trabajar en la Tengo, que era la compañía de automóviles que le hacían los anuncios todos, los parabrisas de los carros, de todas las clases de carros, lo hacían ahí. Yo trabajaba en una máquina dándole una maniguetica constantemente. Oíste que era terrible, el brazo se me ponía mal, porque fue fuerte, era fuerte. Ahí estuve 16 años hasta que tú naciste, me hice cargo de ti. Esto fue cuando yo salí, cuando yo me retiré ya de donde vivía en Elizabeth, New Jersey. Esta es la despedida que me dio la iglesia, el nombre mío, todas las cosas, y muy bonito. Me hicieron un party muy grande, oíste, de despedida, que vine para acá.
Cuando llegué de Cuba, el primer trabajo que yo tuve fue en una fábrica de Coffee Mart Corporation. Entonces de ahí Georgina vio que había un periódico, ¿no? Me dijo, mira, hay un examen para el banco. Cuando yo llego allí a examinarme al banco, figúrate, yo poco inglés y todo, es completamente distinto a los exámenes que teníamos en Cuba.
Abuelo, ¿cuántos años trabajaste en el banco?
15 años.
15 años.
15 años. Después del banco, entonces, yo puse used car dealer. Y empezamos, vendíamos muchos carros, vendíamos como 30 carros todos los meses. El dealer lo tuvimos como 8 años. El problema del dealer es que vino un problema grave de la gasolina. y los carros todos eran grandes. Yo quería sacar la licencia del real estate para meterme a los negocios de comercio y todo, y al fin lo logré.
¿Y el examen estaba en qué idioma?
En inglés, desde el primer viaje la saqué. De 50 la sacamos nada más que 4.
Being so Cuban among my friends, a lot of them are shocked to know that I've never been to Cuba, wondering what the big deal is. It's hard to explain in a few words what my family experienced. Although I was raised with the uplifting and jovial Cuban spirit, there was always an overprotective shadow, placed in pain, loss, and fear.
¿Y cuántos días tú vas a estar en Cuba?
Yo no sé si voy a Cuba todavía, estoy pensándolo.
Yo te digo mi vida, sinceramente, cuando todos los problemas de Cuba, que todo el mundo empezó a mandar a los hijos para acá solo, yo dije, mi hijo si va a salir conmigo y si no nos quedamos todos, ¿ok? Porque es que uno tiene que tener una protección muy grande con los niños, una protección muy grande. El niño tiene 5 años nada más, mi vida. Ponte eso en la cabeza, mi amor, ponte eso en la cabeza, ¿ok? Cualquier cosa, oíste, tienes que tener, tú eres la mamá y el papá, ¿ok? Yo te lo aconsejo, no es el momento, sinceramente, que tú dejes al niño solo, tiene 5 añitos nada más.
How did you decide to go to Cuba?
I had moved up to New York, and I was very shocked to find people that were supportive of Fidel, because I had not grown up with that at all. In Miami, if anybody was supportive of Fidel, they didn't say anything about it. And when people would find out I was Cuban, they would, oh yes, I was just in Cuba, and they would praise the revolution and all the Che t-shirts. And I was like, what the what? Like, this is ridiculous. That guy's an assassin. What are you saying to me? Oh, you're one of those Miami Cubans. You haven't been there. I have. And that's when I was like, I'm not going to hear that again. I'm done with that line. I'm going to go.
You know, it's interesting. My mother and my father both were very, very committed to the idea that they were exiles and that one day they would return to a free Cuba. I never really heard in my family this sense of, well, we're here to stay. There was always this longing, this craving, you know, for the Cuban experience and to go back to Cuba.
Martí dijo, y esto muchos cubanos, no sé, no es que no lo sepan, pero es que lo ignoran. Martí dijo que patria no es el lugar donde se nace. Patria es el lugar donde tú puedes realizar tus sueños.
I always joked that I became Latina after 30, but the truth is that I was raised in a bicultural world, Spanish and English, with American culture always knocking on my abuela's door, challenging and reshaping the traditions and rules of the older generation. Annoyed by the need to reconcile these two worlds, I started to wonder if my questions of identity were just a first world problem.
El ser humano es tribal, pertenece a una comunidad de gente. Y tú perteneces a tus padres también, a tus abuelos, me decías que te habías criado con ellos. Tú quieres pertenecer a esa tribu también.
Yo me siento americano. Y me siento americano porque aquí, hasta ahora, he realizado mis sueños. Todo lo que yo he soñado. No pude llegar a ser, quizás, lo que yo quería ser. Pero en eso no hay No hay seguridad.
In so many other countries, this identity thing is very fluid. I have had so many conversations with people who just cannot wrap their head around Afro-Latina. Like this idea of like, so wait, you could be Black and Cuban at the same time? How is that possible? Like, it's not that hard. It's really very doable. There are a lot of Black people who are Cuban.
When I was in Cuba, people would always size me up. I'm like, you're Cuban. But from over there or from over here? Always, testing me. Oh, Miami. I have a cousin there. Always, wanting to know where I stood. Why do you come to Cuba? Because I wanted to see it. Oh. And then after I'd start talking with them and asking them questions and they'd talk with me, the biggest compliment I get would be, pero tú eres cubana. Like they would admit that I was Cuban. I would tell them, no importa dónde viene la gallina, importa que la gallina era cubana, y yo soy cubana. And they're like, immediately, once they got that I wasn't there to take back the house or to exploit them, or, once they got that I really was Cuban and I was there because I wanted to experience my country, and once they got how Cuban I am, I'd start talking with them and they'd recognize my accent. And no, porque mi hermana, porque tú sabes, I'd make a joke or something. The minute I had them laughing, they wanted to give me the Cuban stamp of approval.
Ponte pa lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problema, mi coro. Te la pasa pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Ponte pa lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problema. Caramba, tú te la pasas pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Ponte pa lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problema, mi coro. Te la pasa pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Ponte pa lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problema.
And I'm not sure it's important for all Cuban Americans to go back. I think depending on the generation and depending on the circumstances, it may or may not be important. I mean, sometimes I think for a certain group, it's a statement not to go back. The most obvious, and that you hear it often, I'm sure in the many people that you have and will be interviewing, that they're not gonna set foot until Fidel is dead.
Is there any possibility of return?
If there's a free Cuba, sure, I'll go back, but not under the present system.
And did you ever, I'm sure you did, but did you ever yearn to go back?
Oh, every day.
I have my own opinions about Cuba. My liberal friends don't like them. My conservative friends sometimes don't agree with them. But I almost fluctuate, between the left and the right when it comes to Cuba, because I think it's more of an emotional, strong issue for us than it is a political issue.
It was an amazing place as a reporter to go cover stories. And of course, it was even more amazing to know that, I would go visit my relatives when I was there. The first time I went to cover the Pope's visit, I hung out with my family members and I'd only heard stories about them. And weirder was to hear stories about my mom as a child, right? That your family informs you of those stories about your parents, those embarrassing stories, the silly stories, the funny stories, oh my goodness, you're just like your mom when she was your age. Well, we just had none of that. I mean, nothing.
Actually, it's kind of a very surreal story, because for many years, we did not want to go back to Cuba because of the whole thing. Our parents, no, why are you going to go back? You're going to go back and you're going to get in trouble, blah, 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 blah. And so here we are, photographing Madonna when she sang at the Oscars from the movie Evita. She actually loved Cuban music, and at that time she had just had Lourdes. Mm-hmm. And she asked us, and she said, have you guys been to Cuba? And we're like, no. And she even said, I would go to Cuba if I was not that visible, but I can't.
I can only say, I'm getting even a little goosebumps thinking about it, was just how deeply familiar it was. it made me think in retrospect that that there is a sort of pre-verbal memory, a sensory memory that lit up when I got there. And it was an astonishing feeling. And not only that, but my family there does not stand on ceremony right away. You know, they just clasped me and kissed me and made a fuss over me and called everyone in from the neighborhood because they all wanted to hear my strange accent, which was like this 50s bizarre accent, which had really not progressed. And nicknames and this and that. And so it was like nothing. It was like I'd never left.
I've never been back to Cuba.
But you've been to Guantanamo.
Oh, well, yeah, but Guantanamo is a naval base of the United States in Cuba, which is different from Cuba.
To me, what I found almost painful was when I saw Cuba, when I saw La Habana, and I saw how beautiful it really was. Although it was destroyed, you could see the bones of what it had been. They had downplayed it. They hadn't exaggerated. And if anything, they didn't have the words to express just how beautiful it was.
Our parents talked about this place every day and how magical and how beautiful it was. Y que La Habana, no hay nada como La Habana. And so then we finally get there, and we never paid attention to all that. And then when we finally get there, we realize everything they said is true. It's beautiful and it's magical, except when we were there, and I'm sure it's probably worse now, it was in such a state of destruction that it looked like bombs had fallen, which we would never have allowed our parents to go back because it would have broken their hearts. It broke our hearts.
When people say go before it changes, I say too late. I mean, you should have gone before 1959 because it has changed. Go before it changes is the most exploitative. You know, when people say, "Oh, I want to go before there's a Starbucks." You know, Starbucks hasn't hurt London or Paris. Is it going to stop being a historical city because there's a Starbucks? You can travel to Cuba responsibly, but if you're going to travel, I just want to go before it changes. Come on, you're kind of being a dick, right? I mean, are we not allowed to say bad words?
No.
Oh.
Traveling to Cuba is a really polemic issue. It's a very personal and emotional decision for many Cuban-American families. My recommendation generally is go, visit. Try to put aside, if you can, that pain, which is rightfully yours, and visit Cuba and see Cuba today. It's very easy to villainize. It's very easy to make stereotypes and cast judgments from the comfort of a couch in Miami.
I am not going to wait for Castro, either of them, to die or go away or anything. I mean, they're a part of history. And, you know, that's all we heard growing up was stories about Castro. And, you know, it doesn't make a difference to me. I just want to go to Cuba. To me, Cuba's not about Castro. It's about where my family's from, where my blood is, where the roots are. And Castro, to me, you know.
Espero con un cambio de gobierno, con un cambio que en mi país, pueda ir.
¿Tú no has vuelto?
No, yo no he vuelto más nunca. Yo no he vuelto.
If people are yearning for Cuba, they need to go. It is loaded with emotions. Your family's probably not going to want you to go. My family wasn't crazy about me going. They understood my need to go, but they weren't crazy about it. I think you need to go because you need to live it for yourself.
I think it was my mom's generation that is still holding out her arms and saying no. But I think our generation, we're eager to go. We're eager to see, we want to connect. We want to be able to grab a little bit of that magic that we heard our parents talk about and be able to connect with that.
I think the pain of Cuba has been so deep, so profound, that it's going to take a long time and it's going to take a lot of divine intervention to get this solved. And it's not going to be solved by policies from Washington creating economic opportunities in Cuba. That's not going to change the healing. I think what's going to create the healing is when people see that in Cuba, actually human beings are respected in the same way that they should be respected throughout the world, that people have the ability to choose their leaders, that people have the ability to speak their mind, whether they're for or against the government. When people are able to live truly like you live in a paradise island, you know, in the middle of the Caribbean.
Global excitement over Cuba is at an undeniable high. Regardless of whether you agree or oppose the changes happening in Cuba right now, yearning and hope for a positive change are on everyone's mind.
How do we connect with the past that is so disconnected from us?
You know, I think there's always a way in. I think the best way to the best way to connect with the past is to show up and walk through it. And now you can, you know, to go see the sites that exist today. I mean, to go and show your kids, like, this is where mom grew up and lived. And also talk about the history.
It really was untapped. I think when you thought of Cuba, you thought automatically of the embargo or the Castros, right? And it had to be one of those. And you had to have positions and opinions about both those issues if you were supposed to be relevant in the topic. And we kind of put that paradigm to the side and created our own paradigm that focuses instead on the young person. The future of Cuba is in the hands of its young.
To think that now either we lift the embargo, we send more American tourists, we're going to change Cuba. Well, unless you think that American tourists are a magic wand and an American from Iowa that doesn't speak Spanish is going to go to Havana, magic wand, democracy, change, and so on. Well, if the Latin Americans and the Canadians and the Spaniards haven't done it, how can we expect the Americans to do it? But there is the hope or the illusion that American tourists are going to bring change to Cuba.
El norteamericano es, por lo general, un individuo de una tendencia filantrópica muy grande. Son gente a las que de verdad sienten, al menos ha sido mi experiencia, de hecho sienten que son los culpables de la mayoría de los males de este mundo y que entonces quieren solucionar la mayoría de los males de este mundo. Eso también pasa, ¿no? Y nada, yo creo que eso, no sé si traiga la libertad, pero sí creo que le va a traer un alivio a los cubanos. La libertad de Cuba es un problema de los cubanos, no es un problema de los norteamericanos. Y así debe ser.
I want diverse voices, I want diverse industries, but more than anything, I want Cubans leading the charge. From over here and over there, we need each other.
I want a bridge. I want that bridge from Key West to Havana. I think we're so much closer. It seems like we're apart by this, chunk of water, but we're not. We are the same culture. It's just like living in two different places, and I just want us, to somehow connect or reconnect again. I want the people that have lived in suppression and. I'm trying not to be political here, but that have suffered, with human rights, and also to have a chance to be free, to know what it is to actually have, to express yourself, to have all kinds of freedoms, and also an incentive to work and to make it.
The decision so many made to leave Cuba was not an easy one. It was surrounded with great loss and pain and fear, and still to this day it is very complicated. For most Cuban Americans, going back to Cuba, or going for the first time, is a big deal. In my mind, I was always going with my abuela, and that made it okay. But when abuela got sick, I had to decide then and there if I was going to stay or if I was going to go. I decided to go. I'm thinking of my mom as a little girl, and my dad on the farm, my grandparents, and the centuries of Cuban blood within me. I imagine how my family must have felt leaving that magical island so many years ago.
just as I approach it.
Welcome to Havana, Cuba. The local time is 2:30. Damas y caballeros, bienvenidos a La Habana, Cuba. La hora local, 2:30.
When I first embarked on this life-changing journey, I thought it was about making the difficult decision to visit Cuba against the wishes of many people in my family and community. But it turned out to be a discovery of my own identity. Not only the Cuban side, but the fact that I am undeniably American, in a good way. Cuba was beautiful and grand and in ruins all at the same time. While a big part of me felt like an outsider, I felt hope and energy in connecting with the people. I think the brightest future in Cuba is finding respect and understanding for one another. Once I set foot on the island, I realized that there was a whole other story waiting to be told.
Pasa pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas, mi coro. Te la pasa pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas. Caramba, tú te la pasas pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas, mi coro. Te la pasa pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas. Ay, que te la pasa pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Vecina, ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas. Camina. Te la pasa pendiente a la gente, cuidado si te quema. Mi vecino también. Ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas. Ay, pero ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas. Ah, pero ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas. Ay, pero ponte pa' lo tuyo, que hasta tú tienes problemas. Y dice, me saluda de frente y me ripia por detrás. Tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Vamos a ver ahora. Me saluda de frente y me ripia por detrás. Tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Ay, timbero, me saluda de frente y me ripia por detrás. Tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. En que tú estás, tú ves. Me saluda de frente y me ripia por detrás. Tengo que decirte, ¿qué pasa? Hacer que volar. Ay, timbero, me saluda de frente y me ripia por detrás. Tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Déjame tranquilo ya. Me saluda de frente y me ripia por detrás. Tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Oh, pero tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Ay, tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Está bueno, ya no hables más, papá. Hacer que volar. Está bueno, ya no hables más, papá. Hacer que volar. Oh, pero tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Ay, pero tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. Ay, está bueno, ya no hables más, papá. Hacer que volar. Ay, está bueno, ya no hables más, papá. Hacer que volar. Ay, pero tengo que decirte, hacer que volar. La voz, no cabe duda que tú la rumba la tocas bien. Ese es tu estilo, ese es tu tren, ese es el tuyo. Pero cuando sale a la pista yo lo